Welcome to Things You Don't Know. This episode is all about taxes, and it's kind of really very interesting. And we're also doing this in a kind of a different way because I got thinking about taxes and taxation and what's fair, what's not fair, how can we could do things different, and so I asked a little bit of help from ChatGPT. So, in all fairness, I have to give a nod of the cap to ChatGPT for some of this stuff. And Dr. Deneen, what can you add here at the very beginning?
Well, you're certainly right that taxes can get you thinking about fairness. Just let me personalize this a little. For instance, when I'm calculating deductions on my salary, small as it is sometimes, and watching a decent chunk of the money go to Uncle Sam, I can't help but wonder, what if the ultra wealthy paid the same percentage of their income in taxes that, quote, regular people do? Chandler, you had something to say about that.
Yeah, I did. I asked ChatGPT how to explain how rich people avoid taxes like I'm 12 years old. So here's what I actually asked it. What happened if billionaires paid taxes at the same rate as the middle class did? And the AI's response was more nuanced than I actually expected. It revealed some surprising truths about how our tax system really works. Earning passive income doesn't need to be difficult. You can start this week.
Yeah, I'm all in for that.
Me
But
too.
but you know what? It's not quite as simple or straightforward as that. So let's kind of set the record straight. A common misconception that I had, and many people have too, is is kind of really very nuanced, based on actual data from PolitiFact and ProPublica investigations. The 25 wealthiest Americans currently pay an average federal income tax of 16% under the existing law. Meanwhile, households earning 50 to 100,000, where most teachers, firefighters, and other middle class workers fall, typically pay an effective tax rate of between 0 and 15%. So, contrary to what I'd heard, billionaires don't actually pay less than teachers under the current tax law. But here's where it gets pretty interesting. If wealth was more evenly distributed across America, how much money would every person have? Sean, what do you think?
That's an interesting question. The ChatGPT explained the issue isn't necessarily specifically the tax rates themselves, but how different types of income get taxed. This is where the system becomes genuinely unfair. Billionaires have a way of benefiting from tax strategies that lower their effective tax burden compared to what ordinary income earners face on their wages. What the system does, it taxes work more than wealth. Just think about that for a minute, friends.
So you get taxed more for work than for wealth. Where does, what is wealth? I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, Dr. Deneen. Continue. I'm interested here.
That's quite all right. What that means in practice is I get a paycheck every 2 weeks when I'm teaching, and the taxes come out immediately. When a billionaire's stock portfolio increases in value, even by millions, they don't pay the taxes on that growth right away. They don't pay it until or unless they sell those stocks. There's a specific economic concept here, Chandler, that you had something to say about.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this really interesting strategy that ChatGPT also broke down here with me. The buy, borrow, die strategy that wealthy people use to minimize taxes. It sounds like financial wizardry because, well, honestly, it kind of is if you think about it. Here's how it works. Billionaires borrow money against their stock holdings, which is not taxed. They live off those loans and then they pass their assets to heirs, largely tax-free when they die. Meanwhile, regular people like me, we can't defer taxes on our paychecks. We can't even borrow against our own retirement accounts without major penalties. Doesn't that kind of seem unjust, Dr. Janine?
It does. There's ProPublica data that illustrates this. Here's just one example. The top 25 billionaires saw their wealth grow by, hold on to your hats, folks, 401 billion with a B dollars between 2014 and 2018, and they paid just 13.6 billion in federal income tax. You want to know what that is? That's a rate of 3.4%. That figure really stung. While they are paying their legal tax obligations and realized income, their wealth is growing at a rate that's taxed far below what middle class workers pay on their salaries. Bill, you ran some numbers about this.
Yeah, if you run the numbers on what would happen if billionaires paid taxes at the same rate middle class families do, around 15 to 22%, what would happen? Using the ProPublica data, if those top 25 billionaires had been taxed at a 20% rate on their wealth growth, they would have paid around 80 billion instead of 13.6 billion. Extrapolate that across approximately 1,000 billionaires. Huh, you're talking hundreds of billions in added revenue every year. What do you think, Chandler?
I'm just trying to let that sink in for a minute. That is crazy. And I just get real interested when I think about where all that money could go. The AI outlined several ways that this massive revenue increase could transform government services. Healthcare. We could expand Medicare and Medicaid, potentially moving toward universal coverage.
You mean everybody could be insured and they could get health care? Yes.
Yes, wouldn't that be a very good thing for the economy
Yes.
and for the world? Education? We could fund universal pre-K or make community college free for everyone.
That is the case in Michigan. So
Oh,
it can be done.
if given the right amount of effort, absolutely. Infrastructure and climate, we could invest in serious clean energy projects and actually fix our crumbling roads and bridges.
Oh, Sean likes to drive down into the holes and back up the other side on the highways, don't you, Dr. Deneen?
Good Lord.
Well, see, I like to do it backwards from that. I like to go up and down, like up the other side, and then back down the holes. That's how I like to drive
Yeah,
it.
we have a saying in New Jersey that we have two seasons, construction and winter.
And you know what is actually really interesting? We could actually have debt reduction. Did you know that we could actually pay the national debt down instead of actually adding to it every year? Wouldn't that be cool? ChatGPT noted that this extra revenue could stabilize the economy by boosting the spending power of everyday Americans, basically reducing inequality in a way that helps everyone, not just those at the bottom.
What really was eye-opening for me is the problem is more complex than we thought. It isn't necessarily that billionaires are openly breaking the law or even paying lower rates on the taxable income. The issue, as I said before, is that our entire tax system is designed around taxing work instead of wealth. Middle class families can't defer taxes on their wages or borrow against their stocks tax free. This creates a fundamental unfairness where people who work for their money get taxed right away, while people whose money goes through investments can delay these taxes or even avoid them entirely. Bill, you wanted to expound on that a little.
Well, yeah. What you're saying, Sean, is that if I invest in essentially the same kinds of things that these billionaires are investing in, when I get revenues from that, I pay taxes on that. They don't. You let that little tidbit sink in. It's kind of interesting. So, you know, kind of when I was thinking about all this, I realized that the conversation about billionaire taxes is a lot more complicated than simple rate comparisons. Under current law, wealthy Americans do pay their required taxes, but the system allows their wealth to grow in ways that are largely untaxed, while regular workers pay taxes on every dollar they earn. The AI concluded that if we could successfully tax billionaires more like middle class workers, the results could mean hundreds of billions in additional revenue annually and potentially better funding for health, education, climate programs, infrastructure, oh, little things like that. What's more, it could have the power to reduce inequity and improve public trust in the tax system. Maybe the real question isn't whether billionaires should pay more taxes, but whether our entire approach to taxing work versus wealth makes sense in an economy where most billionaires' fortunes come from asset appreciation, inheritance, and things like that rather than traditional income. I know, Chandler, you have some thoughts on this.
I do. And I was doing a little deep dive in ChatGPT there again. And as ChatGPT put this, the U.S. could significantly shape its fiscal and social landscapes if we can just figure out how to make it work in practice. The idea of the most fair taxing laws is deeply subjective and depends on one's political philosophy, economic theories, and moral values. However, we can examine what many economists, ethicists, and policy experts consider fair based on common principles of tax fairness. What do you think about that, Sean?
Well, there are key principles of fair taxation. Horizontal equity says people with the same ability to pay should pay the same amount. Vertical equity says people with greater ability to pay should pay more. A progressive tax system has taxes that increase with income. Higher earners pay not only a higher amount, but a higher percentage. And they're often considered fairer because they reflect capacity to pay. We also want systems that have transparency and simplicity. They should be easy to understand without a lot of loopholes and reducing manipulation. The benefit principle says people should pay taxes in proportion to the benefits they receive from government services. Taxes should be levied according to a person's capacity to pay. That supports a more progressive taxation system, but there ought not to be an excessive burden. Taxes should not disproportionately harm the poor or severely hinder economic growth. You had examples around the world about this.
Yeah, let's look at the Nordic model. That's Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland. They have a progressive income taxes with no high top rates, high value added tax and VATs, but with exemptions for essentials. They also have extensive public services, like example, healthcare and education. And they also wealth and inheritance taxes do exist in some forms. The fairness rating of this is fairly high from a social democratic standpoint, but debated due to high value added tax burden on lower incomes. A U.S. federal system, ideal versus reality, progressive income tax structures on paper sound pretty good. Regressive payroll and sales taxes in practice tend to be a little bit more complex and nuanced. Corporate tax loopholes and unequal enforcement, that reduces fairness also. In other words, we can't just think about individuals' taxation, but we also have to look at corporate taxation. And we know that big corporations have teams of people who look for their loopholes and construct things in a way that makes them qualify for certain kind of loopholes. Now, the fairness rating of this is moderate to low. It's progressive in design, but undermined by deductions and tax avoidance by the wealthy. I know Chandler has something to say about the flat tax systems in like Estonia, Latvia, and Russia.
Oh, yes. Everyone pays the same percentage of income, regardless of amount. Simple and transparent. Fairness rating, high for simplicity and horizontal equity, but low in vertical equity. Criticized for burdening low income earners disproportionately.
Then you have a land value tax. That came from the political philosopher Henry George in the 19th century. That's a tax on unimproved land value, land that's not being used. It's not a tax on income or any land that has buildings on it. It tries to encourage productive land use and reduces speculative hoarding. It's considered very fair by most economists, especially for funding local services without distorting the market. Now, Bill, you had a list of things you think could make up a most fair system.
Yeah, and that's really complex. But let's see. If you had a progressive income tax with minimal loopholes, that would help. If you had a land value tax to discourage land speculation, and you had carbon taxes to hold polluters accountable, and we know that that's been tried here and meets with massive resistance. And we had low or no taxes on essentials like food, medications, and that sort of thing. The other thing would be having something that would actually give some taxes for wealth and inheritance, which that would reduce intergenerational inequality, and a simplified tax code to close corporate and elite tax avoidance. I know that Chandler, you know, we've talked a little bit about this, and there's just a lot of things to be considered. What are you thinking here?
If we think about this, I think we should consider that no system is perfect, but I think that fair taxation genuinely aims to reduce inequality, encourage productivity, and fund public goods efficiently. If you're looking for a model to advocate for, the Nordic approach plus the land value tax is widely respected across ideological lines for balancing fairness and economic sustainability.
I think we need to remember, friends, that there should be an attempt to make things fair. It's not always possible. There's a balance between needed public services and people retaining more of their own money. If you like this, ladies and gentlemen, please give us a comment, leave us a like. Many other interesting things coming up. I want to thank Dr. Weaver and you, Chandler, for your participation in this. I think we're really getting into some interesting stuff.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we could go on and on and on and on, but I think we've given a sketch, an overview here, and I hope that you found it enlightening, interesting, and yeah, debatable. Let's just acknowledge that it's all debatable.
It is debatable, and I think that now, Bill, I must say, now that we have laid the groundwork for some of this, now our audience will go do their own research.
Absolutely. And that's what we hope. Listen, thanks a lot, folks, for joining us today. We're going to close out for today. We've got other good stuff coming. Thanks a lot for listening. Come on back soon. Bye for now.
So long, folks.
Ta ta.